Chris Herring is my guest. Chris, great to have you back. How are you?
I'm good, Jim. How are you?
Good to visit. All right, so the conference finals, Chris, had some pretty nasty games, pretty ugly games. What were you thinking last night then when Steph Curry got off to that amazing start, but Boston was still right there with them at the end of the first quarter?
It was nice to see some fireworks and a close game instead of it just being one-sided fireworks. And obviously it turned out to be a pretty entertaining game beyond that. The Boston lead at half. The Warriors went on one of their patented third-quarter runs, and then obviously kind of the reversal that we didn't see happening, I think, was that Boston just kept hitting shot after shot after shot to start the fourth with really no response from Golden State, particularly a game at Golden State. I think that was the part that kind of threw us off, and I imagine that we'll see counters in Game 2. My question is, how much does Golden State react? You listen to Steve Kerr after the game and Draymond Green after the game, and Draymond in particular almost seemed kind of dismissive of the sort of performance that you saw out of Boston, and I think was probably a little bit too dismissive, frankly, because Boston is a team that has guys that they can play five out and make shots like that. Maybe it was a little bit crazy to see it all happen in one quarter, but we've seen Boston make 23s in a game before. We've seen Al Horford. I'm pretty sure I was on your show the last time Al Horford had a big game like this in the playoffs, like he did against Milwaukee. Derek White had a game like this 2 games ago against Miami. So it's not so stunning that it happened. It's just that it all happened in one quarter as opposed to it happening more spaced out over the course of the game.
Chris Herring is joining us. You just gave us a lot of really, really good information. I could respond to any and all of that. You make so many good points. What about if we were to backtrack? I mean, when Steph starts off the way he was, Chris, shooting the way he was, what did you see in Boston? How did they adjust defensively, and how were they able to limit him the way they did the rest of the game?
If you saw that one portion, it's really rare that when you're watching the games on television that you see those mic'd up segments where they actually tell you anything. It's kind of wasted air most of the time. But last night, they caught Marcus Smart kind of imploring his teammates to play further up in the pick and roll. At the very beginning of the game, that first quarter, you saw a lot of plays where Robert Williams was kind of stuck maybe just above the three-point line, but not much. And with Steph Curry, you can't do that. Him, Damian Lillard, Trae Young, they'll pull up from 35 feet. So you have to be right on the other side of the screen to take away his airspace. And Marcus Smart made the comment, he said, this isn't the Miami series anymore. You've got to play higher up. And so as soon as they came out of that first quarter, there were 2 things that happened. One, Steph Curry had that third foul very early, which might have thrown him out of rhythm. And then 2, Boston was playing much higher up the rest of the game, and he really didn't have that space anymore, and he didn't score in that second quarter, and it was a big momentum shift. You also had the fact that maybe because Steph was so hot at the end of that first quarter that Jordan Poole, who normally comes in towards the end of the first or the back end of the first quarter and kind of gets it going himself, maybe because Steph was so hot, Jordan Poole really didn't have like a transition, a clean transition, a clean handoff from Steph, and maybe wanted to let Steph kind of get the rest of it out of the system before he got going, and he never really did get going, Jordan Poole, over the course of the game. So those were the really big differences that I noticed from quarter 1 to quarter 2. Boston's defense tightened, and Jordan Poole really never got going. Steph Curry never really got extremely comfortable again until the third quarter.
Chris Herring is joining us. Chris, what about Jayson Tatum? He obviously did not shoot it well last night, but when you look at his 13 assists and how he got other guys involved, set everybody else up, what does that tell you about his growth as a playmaker?
Yeah, and it's been there for a while. This was the big button that Ime Udoka pushed kind of midseason when he implored him, Jaylen Brown, to become better playmakers. He's talked about how when he was in San Antonio that Greg Popovich didn't hesitate to tell Tony Parker when he was doing too much and needed to throw the ball elsewhere because he was being doubled or because the second defender was in his sight. Jayson Tatum's been doing this for a while. My teammate, Michael Pina at Sports Illustrated, wrote a piece a couple months ago about just how much better Jayson Tatum was seeing the floor. I think he had 7 assists before halftime, which is just tremendous growth from him because we've seen it before in the finals. We've seen it before with Tatum's idol and Kobe sometimes where you can have a really, really off shooting night, and it kind of takes the wind out of everything else. Maybe you're showing effort on defense, but maybe you're not passing the ball. And then in a case like that, the defense wins every single time because they know as long as they lock you out that nobody else is going to score either. Tatum had the 7 assists, I think, before half. Those 7 before half would have been more than anybody else the Warriors had the whole game for Tatum's first half. And, he was still making plays for them, which allowed them to be in a rhythm so that by the time you get to a fourth quarter, the game's not over. And so then you have Horford, you have Derek White, you've got Marcus Smart, you've got Peyton Pritchard that are all engaged. And Jaylen Brown took over the game enough in the fourth quarter where I think he had 5 assists in the fourth quarter alone as guys continued to make shots and really hit all those shots to start the fourth. The game wasn't over, even though we thought it was. I think most of us thought it probably was kind of in the bag. But Jayson Tatum having those guys in enough of a rhythm early from moving the ball, even when he didn't have it going, I think was a huge factor.
We're talking to Chris Herring. Chris, I think you're right. I think you and I did talk once before about Al Horford in a playoff game. Man, this guy, God, what a stud. I mean, I'm watching this guy. And, of course, that stat about experience in the finals was just so ridiculous. I mean, it was so utterly meaningless. But to see this guy show up the way he did and to hear the young guns on that team talk about him the way they do, what was your sense of watching him last night, the way he conducted himself on both ends of the floor and the impact he had on everybody?
Yeah, I mean, he's someone who he struck me as a pretty clear X factor in this series before. There are 2 guys, really, that I was thinking about. Him from the Boston side, and as you talk about experience, I think Jordan Poole from the Golden State side. Really, in some ways, this series is going to end up being a little bit like the Mavs series in the sense that Boston can kind of create their own shot pretty much, I would almost say sometimes more easily than Golden State can, which is really rare that you can say that about a Golden State team. There were times watching the game last night where it felt like Golden State had spacing problems, which it really, since when do we have that when Steph Curry is picking up double teams at half court and stuff like that. But there are times where Draymond Green's shooting the way he shoots and having Kevon Looney out there that it kind of gets a little bit cramped where you're waiting for somebody else to make a play. Klay Thompson has never really been a huge playmaker. He's someone that comes around screen. Jordan Poole is that guy. From the last saw them in the finals, they had Kevin Durant. Jordan Poole is being asked to be that guy now. And for the last few series, it hasn't been a huge problem for that. But all of a sudden, you've got a lot of guys that don't mind switching on to somebody like Jordan Poole. We all saw that shot at the end of the first half last night where he hits the top of the backboard. He never fully looked comfortable. Again, maybe some of it was Steph being on such a hot streak when Jordan Poole needed to come into the game. But there's that. And then on the other side, Horford is someone that you have to kind of leave somebody open if you're going to throw extra defensive attention at Tatum or Jaylen Brown. And Horford is comfortable being that guy, just like we saw Grant Williams in the Game 7 of that Milwaukee series. They're just being told to shoot, these extra guys, Derek White, Al Horford, Marcus Smart. And if he's going to shoot at a 46% clip in the playoffs as opposed to 36 for what he shot in the regular season and over the course of his career, is that sustainable? And Draymond was kind of dismissing that yesterday with Derek White and everybody else and Al Horford. If it's sustainable for a few more games, it might result in a championship for Boston. It's been huge for them.
Right? Like they got the looks. They knocked him down last night. So, Christian, before I let you go, you're hitting on this. Let me ask you this. Bottom line, like they got the huge quarter from Steph Curry, 20 from Andrew Wiggins. Otto Porter went 4 of 5 from deep off the bench. But the offense was not there, as you're pointing out, when they had to have it most. Is it just an off night for Golden State, or is that Boston's defense locking them up?
No, I think it's at least a little bit of the second part, and I think that's why it's important. I think it is really easy to look at some elements of the box score and say they weren't awful. Klay, I think, was 6 for 14, which is not great, but it's not horrendous. I think the bigger factor, one of the things that stood out to me, really, was the composition of the shots. Draymond Green had, I think, 12 shots and was 2 for 12. And I think Jordan Poole was 2 for 7. And if you're Golden State, you absolutely want that ratio reversed, where you need Jordan Poole taking close to 12, 15, 20 shots instead of Draymond taking 12 and the shots looking the way they looked when Draymond took them. I mean, he had one where he torpedoed it toward the basket, on a layup. But I think the fact that Jordan Poole's only getting 7 shots tells you about his lack of comfort against this Boston defense. And the fact that Draymond's taking 12 shows you that Boston is kind of tricking him, really goading him into shooting, which is what they want. So I think Boston's defense dictated a lot about what we saw yesterday, and they just couldn't turn the faucet back on Golden State once it got to the fourth quarter.
Dead on. So last thought, Golden State's won a road game in 26 straight postseason series. They're going to have to make it 27 in order to win the title. How do you see the rest of this series going?
I think that Golden State probably makes some adjustments. I think that you have to be happy if you're Golden State that you were able to kind of take something away from Tatum. Obviously, it's scoring. I don't know that they need to be that aggressive about Tatum. Like, if I had a choice between 20 points for Tatum, something closer to his scoring average, versus Tatum having 13 assists, I would rather Tatum score a little bit more than he did yesterday if I'm Golden State than have him just become John Stockton. So I think that maybe to take the foot off the pedal from an aggression standpoint defensively is what Golden State does. Maybe don't bring quite as much help with Draymond on the backside and stay more closely attached to Horford, Derek White, Marcus Smart. I don't think you want the Boston Celtics going off from 3 the way they did at the end of the game. If that had been the third and the fourth quarter instead of just the fourth, we're looking at a game that it could have played out the same way. It just wouldn't have been all at once in that fourth quarter. And I think that's what Golden State keeps saying and why they're so dismissive of it. But we've seen Boston have 50%, 23s made in a night before. That could happen again. And so I would be less aggressive about guarding Tatum and making the other guys put the ball on the floor instead of just firing away from 3.
That all makes sense to me.